Hey there, all you creepers and reapers. Welcome to another episode of the Femme Fatalities. I'm your co-hostess, Anna, and I am here with...
Hey, Grievelings and Frightlings, it's Margaret and Anna.
We are going to have a howling great time on this podcast. That's right. We're talking about none other than the great classic American Werewolf in London. So get your lycanthropic little list of goodies ready and settle in with some bruja brew to listen to us. Before we get started, triggers galore! So we've got corpses, body horror, animals. What else?
Pornography.
Mm-hmm. Nightmares. That can be very triggering. Familial
Yes.
death. Imminent threat of a mystical force. What else?
Hostility. Feeling like you don't belong.
Yeah, that's actually a really very strong trigger and theme in the film. Yeah. And also the trigger is, I think, who we feel and identify as our protagonist dies at the end. So if you've never seen the movie, sorry for the spoiler, you should probably watch it. But that can be very devastating when you invest in a film.
Yes. Oh, I agree. And this movie, it has a lot of thanological themes in it, like his buddy. So for those of you that haven't watched, you better stop now, even though we've already had some spoilers. Right? So his buddy Jack, right? Do you feel like that is survivor's grief? What do you make of him coming back from the dead? I mean, he tells us later on, but I feel like his character has more than just foreshadowing and I'm gonna try to persuade you to sacrifice yourself.
Oh, absolutely. I think a huge component of that is survivor's guilt and also just feeling lost. I think that, when you have a close friend that truly understands you and sees you for who you are and gets you, kind of willing them back and not fully accepting the situation at hand, because every time we see poor Jack, he's more rotten, he's more decomposed, he's not doing too well in limbo. And I think that just enhances David's feelings of guilt and bereavement and loss and all of these changes that are going on.
And his denial, like talk about bereavement. So people that haven't watched it, David and Jack are hiking, they are backpacking across England. They end up in a small little town where there's a pub and the villagers are not friendly to them, so they leave. They do tell them stay on the road. They don't. They're attacked by a werewolf. Jack dies. David survives. And David is in denial about surviving. He is in denial about becoming a werewolf. He is just so full of denial the whole entire film. Would you say up until his death, or do you feel like there's a point where he starts to maybe process all the loss he's had?
I think right up until he gets shot, like right before when she's just like, David, I love you, and you see this kind of human facial expression in his animal form, and it's like, oh, he's realizing what life looks like now, and then he's dead.
Would you say that werewolf movies have a theme of taming the wild? Because it feels like so many werewolf movies, including this one, there's a moment where a living loved one is trying to connect with the loved one who is in beast form.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it for me is directly proportional to grief, because how often do we feel wild and out of control and not like ourselves when we're grieving? And we long for someone to reach out and someone to connect with us. And as we see in American Werewolf in London, when someone finally does reach out, sometimes it's too late. And just how relationships change, and maybe David's not dead, but that connection is gone because of the lack of support. And I saw a while ago on social media kind of a meme that said something of the effect of it's grief. You can't smoke it away, you can't drink it away, you can't promiscuate it away. You have to work through it. And when we look at the things that David's doing with, I am so sorry I forgot her name, the female nurse that he meets and lives with during his recovery, they're not really engaging in behaviors that contribute to his grief journey. And I think that a lot of that relationship is essentially just a distraction for him. Maybe it's something different for her, but to him, it's just distracting him from what's really going on.
Yes. I feel like you touch brilliantly on the grief and then his distraction. So it could just be sex for him. And this is a movie. And so she is in a role of a caretaker. And so she's caretaking him and he's not. He's just consuming. He's trying to eat his way through his grief.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you're right. She's a caregiver, right? She's a nurse. So we know that she has that caregiving personality. She just wants to fix him and make him better, but doesn't really know how.
Yes. So I'm curious, when he's hiding out, why do you feel like he decides to hide out in a porn theater? Like, that's a very interesting place to hide.
I think, especially at that time, and even today, there's something that people associate the sex industry in particular with being a beast, right? The animal instinct within. So, if it's a full moon and you're going to shift, nobody's probably going to notice because they're all animals in there anyway, or at least that's the school of thought. What do you think?
Ooh, I really like that take on it. I was wondering if it was going into uninhibited desires. Werewolf movies tend to have this element of this uninhibited, the monster within, the beast within, and porn is highlighting that we all have sexual desires. There's a sexual beast within all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that take too. And the scene where they're in the theater and the guy, I forget exactly what happens in the porn movie, but this guy shows up and she's like, "Oh, you're not so and so," and he's like, "No, I'm not," and she's like, "That's okay, come on in." Always, like, ever since I saw it when I was a teenager, every time I watch that, it just makes me laugh hysterically because it's like one of the silliest things. And I don't know, I just enjoy that little bit of comic relief in the movie.
The movie has lots of comic relief. It's full of comic relief. So that is great. I'm also curious, what is your favorite scene in this movie? Because I feel like this movie has a lot of iconic, memorable scenes to it.
My favorite scene, hands down, is the shift when he drops that milk. And also, I think it's really interesting too how milk was such a theme in the 70s and 80s when people were turning into a metaphysical creature. But when he starts shifting, I just love it. I think it's beautiful and delightful, and it stands the test of time. Like, compared to a modern movie, his shift is better, I would say, than most. And we are recording in preparation for all of these new werewolf films to be coming out in the next few months, so it'll be fun to see how those special effects stand to this one. What about you? What's your favorite scene?
Well, I have a different one. I agree with you. I just want to say, yes, his transformation feels like hands down one of the best transformation scenes. It's just brilliantly done, especially for the time and what they had access to.
Yeah,
I'm gonna go with the subway though. When he's stalking the business guy, oh my gosh, that is just, I love that sequence.
It's terrible. Even though it's in London, every time he gets the guy, I'm like, "Take that, corporate America." And of course, to second runner up, though, is when the kid with the balloons is like, "Mommy, a naked American man stole my balloons." And there's just so many quotable scenes in the movie. And kind of to go back to the shift for a minute, I love that his body shifts and changes, his flesh does not rip off, because a lot of modern day lycans or werewolf films, you have to remove your skin suit or your human skin. And I love that the wolf is part of him. And that
Yes.
just, to me, it's more meaningful than, oh, let me rip this off and see what's underneath.
Yeah. I feel like you touch on the core of what like lycanthrope is. It is
Mm-hmm.
the beast within. So
Yeah.
we are transforming. We are not changing our clothes
Yeah.
because I just finished my day job, so I'm at home and I'm putting on my comfy clothes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We're letting ourselves out. And yeah, you're right though. I'm thinking of just the scene where he is stalking the guy, and just even the animatronics and the puppetry that went into that, and the escalator and the stair. Oh, yes, it's just I love this movie. So
Yes.
yeah.
I think my favorite werewolf movie, my favorite,
Mm-hmm.
and I think we agreed earlier, this is our favorite werewolf. There is
Mm-hmm.
something, I feel like this werewolf kept its humanness.
Yeah.
So, like you're talking about the end, we
Mm-hmm.
still see David in there. There's this humanness
Yeah.
in there where it feels like so many modern horror movies that just get so focused on the monster,
Mm-hmm.
forgetting that there is this person that we are empathizing with. And
Yeah.
David,
He's
I mean,
just
he's likable, but you're not like
in love with him.
completely, yeah,
Yeah.
you're a jerk. Like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's just like a regular person trying to figure out who they are. And he's relatable, I think.
yes, he's
Yeah.
relatable. He's funny.
Mm-hmm.
And we could see a bit self-centered. He
Mm-hmm.
also just lost his best friend.
Yeah.
I'm curious when Jack's like, sacrifice yourself. Like, you need to kill yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you need to end this. If somebody was dead who you watched traumatically be
Yeah.
murdered, so you're going through traumatic grief. So yeah, you're
Mm-hmm.
gonna be self-centered and lost. And what would you think if somebody was like, no, like you watched me get killed, you got bit,
Mm-hmm.
you gotta kill yourself.
Yeah, I think for me, I'd be like, okay, well, you came back to tell me this. You're gonna have to help me take care of this problem then. Um, because I feel like with that, like the whole idea of limbo and stuff, it's like, okay, well, if I complete suicide, even though I'm a werewolf, I don't want to end up in limbo. This is for the greater good. You know, like, Jack, you're going to have to help me do this. Like, just push me up a building or something or whatever. Because by default, I mean, technically, and we are getting into some religiosity and my personal beliefs here, but Jack's already dead. So he's not really murdering me. He's just kind of helping me help everyone else. What about you? What's your take on the the comeback of Jack?
Yes. Yeah. Well, he's in limbo, so he's
Yeah.
not selling a compelling argument for David to kill himself.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like you've shared in past casts about lycanthrope that how do you manage it if I
Mm-hmm.
now know, and that's
Yeah.
what David, and if we look at grief, he has yet to accept the traumatic
Mm-hmm.
death of his friend and his injuries through that.
Yeah.
So he is not yet at a space to say, okay, what am I doing with this? How do I continue life? Am I going to be chained in a
Mm-hmm.
room someplace during the full moon? How am I
Yeah.
going to feed my hunger?
Absolutely. And the other thing too is even when eventually David does die, it doesn't stop the lineage of the wolf, because the original wolf is still out there.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think it's a great conclusion, because if you're like, oh, the movie's over, he's dead. Yeah, but the wolf is still out there.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Great point. Yeah, the wolf is still
Yeah, and that
out there.
speaks to humanity too. the beast is still out there. You know, it's how you handle it and how you perceive it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Mhm. Well, and also the dreams. So,
Mhm.
Margaret and I recently, before we started recording, we're kind of talking about. I've been having some interesting dreams lately, and um, the idea that our dreams are really insights into our psyche and what's
Mhm.
happening there is trying to tell us something about our reality and our completely conscious state that we are not picking up on and we're not seeing. And a lot of werewolf stories forget the aspect of these vivid dreams before the first time you turn. And
Mhm.
I appreciate that that was in there.
Yes, I enjoyed the dreams. I feel like you're saying, it added this texture, this richness to the film,
Hmm.
because then we're seeing how his psyche is processing. He just experienced a trauma, and so then he has the werewolf monsters coming through with their guns and killing
Yeah,
everybody.
absolutely. Well, and one thing, you know, he has, I think, 3 kills, maybe a little bit more when he's running amok at Piccadilly Circle, but um, the whole concept of this werewolf desire to kill, I don't, and listeners, correct me if I'm wrong, Margaret, if you've seen or heard something different, I don't believe in the Wolfen playbook that that's necessary to sustain your livelihood every month, whether or not you let the animal take over. There's nothing to sustain the wolf by killing. Um, so I feel very conflicted sometimes when I watch movies that talk about werewolves and things. And eventually we will get to the Howling as well. But I always think about the third Howling, the marsupials, which my mom, she's a horror fanatic too, but she would let me watch these movies whenever they came on TV when I was a kid. Um, and I can just remember, I think we had gotten a VCR. My dad worked at Radio Shack and he was so excited because we got a VCR. And that was one of the first movies we had on tape. So I watched it all the time and I was like 3 or 4 probably. But I just remember the characters in that movie and how they're developing their lives and they're getting married and they have children and all these things that we associate with normalcy. And they're kind of navigating the full moon and changing and what perpetuates this wolfen behavior. And I wish we would see more of that in werewolf films because it kind of comes down to, you know, nature or nurture. And that application, like if you are a werewolf, right, you have to behave in this manner. It's not a choice, or is it a choice? Are there things that you can do? And that has always just perplexed me since I was a child.
Ooh, thank you for sharing that and trying to understand, right? Like, what is it that our werewolf archetype is trying to get at? Because there is this fear of transformation, becoming
Mhm.
a monster. I could see where it originated from groups of people trying to understand perhaps colonization or war or attacks. Like, how could this person transform and be so blood hungry and
Mhm.
want to just kill without remorse? And I really appreciate that you bring out that there's the human nature
Mhm.
still. So our fear of our transformation, and how in the Howling 3, they're like, okay, how do we deal with this? How does life continue if we look at chronic illness
Mhm.
or other things that we have to deal with throughout our lifetime? How are we adapting? How are we changing? And that, I really appreciate how you share that the werewolf archetype has really gotten like the short end of the stick.
Yeah.
Like, it's really, like, it hasn't been explored. It hasn't been allowed to say, well, where's our human component?
Mhm. Absolutely. And oftentimes, I mean, even if we look at True Blood and other shows, werewolves are portrayed as less than, as not as intelligent, not as capable, less than somehow. And for me, and we've talked about this before, I think they should be higher on the pyramid than other metaphysical creatures because they still have their humanity.
Mm-hmm. They should be up there with
Mm-hmm.
vampires. And
Mm-hmm.
so it is really curious if we look at our human lore and archetypes,
Mm-hmm.
how vampires have gotten more exposure, more work through, more
Mm-hmm.
study than werewolves that get pushed back
Yeah.
more into their animalism.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's the thing too, is I think that, right, so vampires, we're looking at bodily fluid and sexuality, which is something that our society is very interested in. Whereas with werewolves, we're looking at the core of our humanity and what causes us to behave in ways that are unflattering and are pending mortality, right? Because if you're a werewolf, you're going to die. Whether you're killed by someone or you just get old, you're going to die. You're not immortal. And I feel like werewolves are almost more thanatological, whereas vampires are more just kind of almost in that kind of sexual psychology scope.
Ooh, thank you. So I'm curious, and I agree with you. Werewolves are thanological. I also feel vampires reflect our fear of death
Mm-hmm.
and our clinging to life, where werewolves are getting at, like you were saying, like the core us, our humanity. Would you then say that werewolves are harder for people to engage with because they make us more uncomfortable? We can see the sexy vampire, whereas then I think zombies would be, right? The undead are
Mm-hmm.
all of that, that we either go zombies or vampires, and then
Mm-hmm.
werewolves are stuck in the middle.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree with that totally. And I think it's just, once again, it is the fact that I like to think we all have some level of humanity.
Mhm.
And it's kind of that good angel, bad angel on your shoulders, and being a werewolf, at some point that the bad angel or the beast has to take over. You have no control over that. And how uncomfortable is it as human beings to feel out of control,
Mhm.
to feel overwhelmed and anxious and frustrated until that beast comes out, right? So I know for me, and I am interested for you to share if you're comfortable with your behavior, but I feel like my beast behavior is I get so frustrated and overwhelmed and I internalize everything until finally, when I'm by myself and think it's safe, I'll just cry. But it's not a sad cry, it's just a frustration. Let this out for 2 minutes and then I'm fine, right? So it's not that much different than shifting into a werewolf and then shifting back, right? Just a little bit of time. Let me let this out and then I'll be back to normal. And, with the werewolves, it's secretive. No one knows, right? If you're by yourself and you're letting your emotions out, no one knows about that. What about you? What about your beastie behavior?
Ooh, and I got like it's brilliant how you're focusing on, right, the beast within, and how we want to conceal, we want to hide, we want to pretend like we don't have a
Mm-hmm.
beast within. So we have these other archetypes, the vampire, we know them, we know
Mm-hmm.
the beast that they are. Same with the zombie, where again werewolves can feel too human because we can really relate
Yeah.
to this hidden aspect
Mm-hmm.
of ourselves, the monster, the person we become when we're grieving, when we're tired, when we've had a bad day and we're not feeling good, that part of us gets so much more judgment and is ridiculed more. So then, yeah. So my inner beast, she gets mad. she's got a mouth on her, so she'll cuss like a sailor, and she'll probably say something pretty biting to somebody if they cross her when my inner werewolf is coming out. She's the one
Yeah.
that, right, is gonna say something. People are like, "Ooh, okay."
Yeah. And I think all of us have kind of this inner beast or inner wolf, and it comes out differently for all of us, which, once again, if you watch different types of wolf themed or werewolf themed movies, each wolf has a different type of shift, has a different behavior, has a different personality, different archetype, different look. And that really speaks a lot to who we are on an individual level.
Yes. Ooh, yes. Anything else you want to add about American Werewolf?
Oh, just that it's great. And so the movie itself, and part of the reason I love it, I've spoken about Hildy before on a couple casts. My Pomeranian that I had, she was just my love pet, and she's very special to me. She would watch it with me, and she was a little tiny, adorable black Pomeranian, and she had the little white plays. And I was like, "Oh, you kind of look like that werewolf," and so she was my baby werewolf. But every time I watch the movie and David shifts into the werewolf, I'm like, "Oh, I'm thinking about Hildy," and it really warms my heart. So, just to kind of to summarize that, there are different things that bring up memories of our departed loved ones, and it might seem like something strange to someone on the outside, but if it brings you a happy memory and it gives you the good feels, be all about it. It could be a smell, a movie, a memory, something as simple as buying a can of peaches from the grocery store. It could be anything, and those are the moments that we have to savor and really enjoy, especially during our grief journey. How new it is or how far you feel you've gotten, it's great to take time to memorialize those that really affected you and impacted you, and to keep them alive in some way, shape, or form.
Yes. Ooh, it's the continuing bonds that
Mm-hmm.
we often talk about.
Absolutely. What about you? Any thing else that kind of sticks with you through in the movie or about the movie?
It's just a great movie. It's a yearly watch
Yeah.
for me. It's entertaining. It's good. It's aged well and it hasn't aged well. You can definitely see the reflections of life in the 70s
Yeah.
and where society was. It's still really entertaining. So, Anna, who do you most relate to?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, oh golly, I knew you were going to ask this. I should have been better prepared.
I know, and then we're always like, wait, what?
Actually, I'm going to say I most relate to the werewolf that never dies. So the wolf that attacks David and Jack, because um, this is a situation. I'm out here. My people in my town know about me, and they're not hurting me. So the service I have to do to them is to try and stay away, right? Because everyone knows to avoid the moors. And then these two tourists who have already been told stay on the road, don't. You're in my territory. In order to sustain myself and apparently the bloodlust that this character has, I'm going to have to do something. So it's better to take care of it and try and make it swift and quick until the next full moon, because I don't believe that when they get attacked, the object wasn't anything other than dispatching them quickly.
Mhm.
And then it's a bummer because then he gets shot. But I think just the idealism of that, of, I know I have to do this, but I don't want to hurt someone I know and care about, type of thing. And just that internal struggle, or at least that's what in my mind I've given the originating wolf in terms of a personality. What about you?
Yeah. Ooh, I love that answer for you. So the original wolf, the one that is still out there lurking
Yeah.
or thriving,
Mm-hmm.
living.
I like to imagine that they're out there thriving, living their best wolf life. Maybe they've got some puppies. I don't, or some kits, I guess. Yeah. How about you, Margaret?
I'm gonna go with the little boy. Mommy and naked American man stole my balloons.
Like
I'm
one of
just
my
going about my day.
this is one of my favorite movie scenes like ever. It's just so funny.
Yeah.
And of course the mom's like, "What?"
Mm-hmm.
It's great.
Yeah.
Well, I say whether you're a novice to horror films or you have been in the horror genre for quite some time, if you have not seen this movie, add it to your watch list immediately. It is a
Yeah.
classic and remains so. And I hope that if you do take the time to watch it, you get as much enjoyment out of it as Margaret and I do. And if you do, leave
Yes.
a comment below. And if you're listening to this cast, don't forget.
Like, subscribe, follow, comment.
And make sure you eat your coffin cookies and drink your bruja brew. Until next time.
Yeah.
Bye bye.
Thanks for watching and listening.